Well, it's nice to see you all and talk to you again. And today we are going to be talking about the concept of rebirth in Theravada Buddhism. A complex subject, as Dr. Danny suggested. I like to start talking about Lord Gautama Buddha's enlightenment first. As we know, he was born as Prince Siddhartha, left home at age 29 to look for a way out of suffering. And for 6 years, he experienced austerity and self-mortification, believing that the torturing himself will bring enlightenment. And after 6 years, he realized that it was not going to. So he gave up the austerity and decided to follow the middle path and went to this place called Bodh Gaya in India. And on the night of the full moon, day of the month of May, exactly 2,610 years ago, he sat under this bo tree called and started meditating. He remembered that when he was a child, he had meditated on his in-breath and out-breath, anapanasati. So on this night also, he decided to meditate on his breath. And as he meditated, he went into jhanas, the deep mental absorptions. And during the first part of the night, he developed a special psychic power it's called Pubbe Nivasanusutiñāna. And through that mental power, he could see his own previous births. And where he was born, in which family, his name, what he did, and all that, he was able to see through this mental power. And during the second part of the night, he developed another mental power called Chutupapātañāna. And through that mental power, he could see all the other beings also being born and dead in various planes of existence. And not only that, he was able to see that the beings are being born dependent on their karma. If they had done good things, they were born in good places. And if they have done bad things, unwholesome things, they were reborn in bad places. And obviously in the third part of the night, he developed the final mental power called Asravakkhena. Through that, he realized that I have eradicated all my mental defilements and I have enlightened. So we can see that when Buddha told us about the rebirth, it's not because he has heard it from someone else. It's not because he just thought about it or imagined about it. But on the night of the enlightenment, he actually saw through his mental power his own previous births and the births of other beings as well. Now, at that time in India, there were two views about what happens to us after our death. And one of the views is called eternalism, the Sāsvatavada. And according to the Sāsvatavada, there is a permanent entity called a soul. And the soul and the physical body are two different things. So when one dies at the end of one's life, the physical body dies, but the soul moves on, transmigrates to another body in the next birth. And when that body dies, the soul will keep moving on from body to body. So that was the Sāsvatavada, eternalism. The second theory was called annihilationism or materialism or nihilism. In Pali, it's called Uchedavada. They also believe that there is a soul, but they believe that the body and the soul are one and the same. So when one dies at the end of one's life, both the body and the soul dies. So there's no rebirth, and there is no consequences of any karma we do, good or bad, because there's no rebirth. So both theories believe that there is this entity called soul. Buddha rejected both these concepts, and Buddha presented the middle path. And he showed that there is rebirth, but it's following the natural laws of cause and effect, the karma and dependent origination. We have talked about them before. And the Buddha said there's no need for an enduring or permanent entity called the self or the soul. So the Pali word for rebirth is actually punabhava. And the punabhava, the meaning is re-becoming, not exactly rebirth, re-becoming. But in Buddhist literature, Buddhist writings, it's generally referred to as rebirth. And like karma and paticca-samuppada, dependent origination, the rebirth is also quite a central and key principle in the Buddha's teaching. And we need to differentiate between the rebirth and reincarnation, because even at the time of the Buddha, in the other religions, the principle of reincarnation was there. But there's a difference between rebirth and reincarnation, because in reincarnation, they believe in a permanent soul, permanent entity called the soul. So that's sort of, we can say, Sasatavada. So when the body dies, the soul transmigrates to another body in the next birth, and it goes moving. But in rebirth, in the Buddhist rebirth, there is no soul moving or transmigrating from birth to birth, but there's a process which involving a constantly changing stream of consciousness. So one stream of consciousness gives rise to another stream of consciousness during life. And the same happens when we die. A new consciousness starts in the next life. It's not a soul, it's not the same entity. And if you look at the consciousness, from the time we are born until the moment we die, we are conscious. That means there is consciousness, continuous consciousness. But there is no one consciousness. Buddha said it's a series, a stream of consciousness. One unit of consciousness arises and it ends. So there are three stages. Unit of consciousness originates, that's called upada, and it persists not very long, and then it ceases. And as soon as that unit of consciousness ceases, another unit rises. So there is an origin and rise of consciousness, units after consciousness, another consciousness. And what happens when one unit of consciousness ceases is that the karmic energy that this unit possesses will transmit to the next one. So the karmic energy keeps being transferred from unit to unit. And at the end of the life, same thing happens. So at the time of death, there's a consciousness. And when that consciousness ceases, a new consciousness influence in the next life. So it's that stream of consciousness, according to Buddhist teaching, that influences another stream of consciousness, not a permanent entity called soul or self. And we have talked about the three universal characteristics of all mental and physical phenomena before. And everything in this universe, they are impermanent, they are subject to change, and are in a constant state of flux. So that's in Pali called anicca. And everything, because of this impermanent, it's not satisfactory, and that causes suffering, so dukkha. And if we cannot control the permanency and the dukkha sukha nature, then we have no control of them. So there is no autonomous or independent self, anatta. So all mental and physical phenomena in the universe got these three features: anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So in Buddhism, there is no self or a permanent soul. And Buddha said the belief in a self is really a delusion, an illusion created by one's mind. And once we develop this illusion of a self, that's the reason for creating all sorts of problems like craving, ill will, hatred, selfishness, conceit. These are all caused by believing that there's a self or there's a soul. And this self-identification view is called Sakkaya Ditthi. And as we know, Sakkaya Ditthi, the self-identification view, is one of the 10 fetters. The 10 fetters or samyojana are the chains and shackles that keep us bound to this cycle of birth and death, the samsara. So Buddha described 10 fetters, and we can see the self-identity view is really the first one, very first fetter. And Buddha said there are two truths in this world. One is conventional truth, and the second is ultimate truth. Now, the conventional truth, we use a lot of conventional terms to communicate, and through convention, we say it's I or me, or let us take a car. A car is a conventional term. But if you look at it from an ultimate truth, if you take, you take the wheels out and put them on the floor, you take the steering wheel out, you take the seats out, you take the engine out, you take the body out, and there is no car. So only when they are put together, conventionally, we call it a car. And same thing applies to us. So Buddha said, even though we call ourselves a being or person or individual or I or me or they or our, these are all conventional terms. But if you look at it through an ultimate truth, there is only a psychophysical complex called Nama Rupa. And this consists of 5 aggregates. And the 5 aggregates, again, we have talked about them before. Materiality, the Rupa. And there's a physical aspect to us and the mental aspects. The physical aspect is the materiality, that's the Rupa. And then there are 4 aspects to our mental aspects. That's feeling, Vedana, perception, Sanya, mental formations, that's thinking, Sankhara, and consciousness. And the physical aspects and the mental aspects, they interact and they're interdependent on each other. So without the materiality, the physical aspect, the mental aspects cannot survive. And without the mental aspects, the physical aspects cannot survive. And all the 5 factors are in a constant state of flux. So there is no permanency at all. So, and it's the identification with any one or more of these 5 factors that Buddha said is what's called self-identification or self-belief. I talked about the Buddha, the night of the Buddha's enlightenment. So when he finally attained enlightenment that night, and he uttered 2 verses of joy. And the first verse, Aneka jati samsaram sandavisam animbisam gahakarakam gave santu dukkha jati punam punam. I, who have been seeking the builder of this house, this body, failing to attain enlightenment, which would enable me to find me have wandered through innumerable births in samsara. To be born again and again is indeed dukkha. And the second verse, Gahakaraka dittosi punageham nakahasi sabbate pasuka bhanga gahakotam visankatam visankaragatam chittam tanhanam kaya manjaga. O house builder, you are seen. You will not build a house again. All your rafters are broken. The rich pole dismantled. Immersed in dismantling, the mind has attained to the end of craving. So Buddha called the builder of the house, this body, us, is craving. And Buddha said, I have broken all the rafters. And the rafters are all the mental defilements that he eradicated. And finally, he said, the rich pole dismantled. And the rich pole is ignorance. So Buddha recognized the causes of this birth, the body, is ignorance, craving, and mental defilements. So ignorance, really ignorance is the main culprit of our rebirth. And Buddha defined ignorance as the lack of correct understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And we know the Four Noble Truths are the truth of suffering, that there is universal suffering in the universe. And the second truth, there is a reason for suffering, and that's craving. And the third truth is that suffering can be eradicated when craving is eradicated. And the fourth noble truth, there is a process to eradicate suffering, and that's a noble eightfold path. And Buddha said in one of the discourses called Patama Kotigama Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, that's a collection of the Buddha's connected discourses. Buddha said, "O monks, it is through not understanding, not penetrating these Four Noble Truths that we have run on, wandered on this long, long road, both you and I." So Buddha said, it's not through understanding, that's the ignorance, it's through ignorance that all of us have wandered through this samsara, birth after birth after birth. And because of the ignorance, we develop what are called mental perversions. And in Pali, they are called vipallasa. And as we discussed about the three characteristics before, anicca, dukkha, and anatta, everything is impermanent, suffering, and not self. And because of the ignorance and these mental perversions, we see what is impermanent as permanent. We see suffering as pleasure, and we see not self as self. And the result is craving, conceit, wrong views. Everything results from ignorance and these mental perversions. And the next, because of the ignorance, we have craving. And in the first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta of the Buddha as the second noble truth told us the craving is of three types. Craving for sensual pleasures, kama tanha. We crave for things that we see through our eyes. We crave for sounds we hear through our ears. We crave for smells through the nose. We crave for taste through the tongue. We crave for the touch sensations through the body. And we crave for ideas and thoughts in our mind. So sensual pleasure, we crave for the sense. That's the first. Second type Buddha described is craving for becoming or existence, bhavatanha, the craving to keep existing. And the third type of craving was craving for non-becoming or non-existence, vibhavatanha. So as we can see, craving is caused by ignorance, and ignorance and craving operate through karma. So finally, the karma really is the deciding factor in rebirth. We talked about karma last time, but for those who may have missed the talk, karma in Pali means action, and but only intentional actions, volitional. Only if there is the intention, volition, a will, an act become karma. So if something is done unintentionally, accidentally, or unconsciously, it is not a karma according to Buddha's teaching. And we do things in 3 channels. We do bodily actions through our body, kaya karma. We commit actions through our speech, verbal actions, and we commit things through our mental actions. There are 3 channels. And the actions we commit can be good or bad. And if an action is performed based on our unwholesome roots of greed, hatred, and delusion, they are unwholesome, unskillful. They are called akusala karma. And they will give rise to bad results. And if what we do is based on wholesome roots of non-greed, non-hatred, or loving kindness, or wisdom, and they are wholesome and skillful actions, and they are called kusala karma, and they will lead to good results. So in this discourse called Nibbedika Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, Buddha declared, Chetanaham bhikkhave kammang vadami, chetayitva kammang karoti, kayena vachaya manasa. It is volition, intention that I call karma. And by volition, one commits karma through body, word, and mind. So according to Buddha's teaching, the karma is intention, volition, will. Now, to be reborn, of course, one has to die first. So let us talk about death. Now, in Buddhism, there are 3 types of death. The first type of death is that due to impermanency, transiency, all physical and mental matter really begins and ceases, moment to moment. So there's a momentary death throughout our life of everything physical and mental. And that's the first type of death, the momentary death that happens from the time we are born until the time of our death. And the second type of death is the conventional death that we experience at the end of one's lifespan, when the physical body and the mental phenomena, they all disintegrate. And if the remaining karma energy, as I said, through the last consciousness, will pass on to the next existence. So that's the second type of death, but there is rebirth after that death. And the third type of death is the death of a Buddha or an Arahant who have attained Nibbana, who are enlightened. And after that death, there is no further rebirth. So there's a momentary death that we experience throughout our life. And there is the conventional death at the end of our lifespan in one existence. And then the final death is the death of an enlightened one, when there is no rebirth. And there are 4 causes of death. The first is that when we are born with a determined lifespan based on our previous karma. So as I said, it's the karma that decides on the rebirth. And whatever karma that was responsible for deciding our rebirth really decides how long we are going to be living as well. And that's called karma. So when that karmic energy comes to an end, we die. And the second is, in addition to the karma energy, when we are born in a particular plane of existence. So let us say, if we are born as a human being, we have a life expectancy for a human being. Let us say, I don't know, 70, 78 for a woman, or 75 for a man, or something like that. Or if we are born as an elephant, or a horse, or a dog, or a cat, or a bird, or whatever it is, there is a life expectancy for that type of birth. So, and that's called ayukya. And when that life expectancy is exhausted, even if there is karma energy, one can die. And very occasionally, these two can coincide. So the lifespan decided by our karma and the life expectancy of the life that we possess can coincide and cause the death. And that's called Ubeysekara. But sometimes what happens is, due to some unexpected or unnatural causes, even though the karma life is still there, and the life expectancy due to our birth existence is there, both are there, but something happens and one dies, and that's called upachedaka. So the first three types, due to the exhaustion of the karmic energy, due to the exhaustion of the life expectancy, and the combination of the two, and they are called timely death, kala marana. But the fourth one, untimely death, is called akala marana. And this is caused by, when we talked about karma, a strong negative or positive karma will come behind us and take our life away. And that's unexpected, upachedaka karma. And if we can compare this with, let us say, an oil lamp. So in an oil lamp, there's a wick, there's oil, and there's a flame. Let us say the wick is the karmic energy. So when the karmic energy expires, even though the oil is still there, the flame will go. Or when the oil is still there, that means the life expectancy is still there, but the karmic energy has expired. So like that, so the wick burns out first, but the oil is still there. The oil can get burned out. When the wick is still there, flame goes out. And occasionally both the wick and the oil can get burned out at the same time, and the flame can go out. Or when the wick and the oil are still there, a gust of wind can come and take the flame away. And that's the fourth possibility, upachedaka karma. So three ways. One, due to the exhaustion of the karmic energy. Second, due to the exhaustion of the life expectancy. Third, when the two are coincided at the same time. And the fourth is an unexpected, untimely death. Now, I talked about the consciousness arising and ceasing throughout our body. And the last consciousness in this life is called death consciousness, chutti chitta, and the last thought moment of this life. And that thought moment, the consciousness, will be influenced by an action that we have done, a karma. And that karma is called reproductive karma. And that reproductive karma decides where we are going to be born next. And at the time of death, Buddha has said, we can develop three signs. They are called death signs, three. One, whatever we have done, the reproductive karma that's going to be affected, we can actually experience, or we can see that karma, the action itself. So if you have done, let us say, and we have done an alms giving to Buddhist monks, or we have visited Bodh Gaya, or we have meditated, or on the unwholesome side, someone has killed or has been stealing, or or some other act, unwholesome act, that one could see that act itself. So that karma itself can appear in the mind. Or else we may not remember or experience the karma itself, but the symbol representing that action can appear as a death sign. So if we, let us say, the action is giving alms to Buddhist monks, we may not see the action itself, but we might see a symbol like a yellow robe or an alms bowl or something. Or if the action was a murder, we may not see or remember the murder itself, but there may be a symbol, either like a knife or a gun or something like that. And that's called karma nimitta, a symbol representing that action, which is going to affect our next birth. And the third death sign is, it's said that we can actually see signs of where we are going to be born next. So if we are going to be born, let us say, in a hell or in the apayas, we could see the signs of high temperature or suffering. Or on the other hand, if you are going to be born in heaven or celestial world, we could experience the heavenly music and things like that. Or if you are going to be born in a womb, we could see a sign of closed space and things. So there are three types of death signs that we may experience at the last moment of our life. And I said that the last consciousness will be affected by one of the actions, karma, that we have done, good or bad. And depending on the priority of the karmas we have done, I explained last time as well, there are 4 types. And the first type is called Veti karma. That is the very strong, good or bad thing that we have done can overpower all the other karmas and come and influence our last consciousness. And if there is no such strong action we have done, then the proximate action, just before our death, whatever we have done, either good or bad, that can become the reproductive karma and decides the next birth. Or if there is no proximate karma either, then some action that one has been habitually doing during life will come up. So if one has been doing wholesome actions, meditating, giving alms, or more sila or anything, that will come. Or on the other hand, if someone has been killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct, or all that, and one's habitual actions will come up and be the reproductive karma and decides the next birth. And if there is no habitual karma either, then we all have a reserve of our karma that we have accumulated throughout our samsara. And one of those karmas will come up at the last moment, at the last consciousness, and decides the next birth. So there are 4 types of karma that can affect our next birth. So the karma energy, I said, when the unit of consciousness ceases, it transfers the karmic energy to the next unit of consciousness. And similarly, the karmic energy from the death consciousness, the last consciousness, will influence the first consciousness of the next life. And that's called rebirth consciousness. So death consciousness will pass on the karmic energy to the rebirth consciousness. That's called patisandhi vijnana. And that results in the new birth of existence. And in Theravada Buddhism, there is no gap between the death consciousness and the rebirth consciousness. So the death and the rebirth happens immediately, there's without a gap. And as we can see, the force of the karma is the most significant factor. And if you take a human birth for an example, for the human birth, Buddha said, there are 3 factors. 1, the mother needs to be in the fertile period. Second, there has to be union between the sperm from the father and the egg from the mother. Plus, the karma energy from the previous birth needs to be there through rebirth consciousness. So 3 factors for human conception. And again, according to Buddhist teaching, there are 4 types of conception. So when we are reborn, one can be reborn as a conception in an egg. So for example, the birds, reptiles, fish, insects, and amphibians, and they are all conceived or born through an egg. They're called andaja. Or the conception can take place in the mother's womb, like human beings, the mammals, is called jalabhuja. The 3rd type is extraneous conception, samses, and this is where the beings appear in places where there's moisture or when foods rot and things like that, maggots and worms, and they are supposed to be born according to this extraneous conception. And then we have the spontaneous conception, upapathika. So the deities in the heavens and celestial worlds, or beings in the apayas, ghosts and things like that, they are born through spontaneous conception. So there are 4 types of conception. Conception in an egg, andaja. Conception in a mother's womb, jalabhuja. Extraneous conception, samsejaja. And spontaneous conception, upapathika. And when we talked about consciousness, 1 unit of consciousness gives rise to another unit of consciousness. And the 2nd unit of consciousness is not the same as the first, it's different. But it's not completely different either, because the karma energy from the previous unit has transferred to the 2nd. And the same thing happens from life to life. So the new life, which is reborn, is not the same life as before, but it's not altogether different either, because that was influenced by the karmic energy of the previous life. And where are we going to be born? So according to Buddhist cosmology, there are 31 planes of existence. There are 11 planes of sensual existence, kamaloka. There are 16 planes of fine material existence called rupaloka, where there are very fine physical bodies. And there are 4 planes of immaterial existence, where there's no physical body. So if we take the 11 planes of sensual existence, there are 4 planes of depravation, the 4 apayas, and then the human world, and the 6 planes of sensual heavens. They are put together 11, they are the sensual world. And these are the 4 planes of depravation, apayas. The first one is called niraya, the plane of immense suffering. And the second is the animal world, the tirachana yoni. The third is hungry ghosts, the peta. And the 4th is the plane of demons and titans. And the Buddha said that the majority of human beings are destined for one of these 4. And in discourse called Nakasika Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, collection of the Buddha's connected discourses, Buddha was with a group of monks, and the Buddha picks up a little dust with the tip of a fingernail. And he asked the monks, which is greater, the dust on the tip of my fingertips or the soil on the great earth? And the monk said, sir, the dust on the tip of the fingernail is next to nothing. It doesn't even count. There's no comparison at all. The great earth is far greater. And the Buddha said, similarly, monks, so few of the human beings are reborn as human beings, similar to the dust on my fingernail. And the far more of the human beings are born elsewhere, and the Buddha mentors apayas. And these are the 6 planes of sensual heavens. There are plane of 4 grace guardians, Chatur Maharajika, plane of the 33 gods, Tavatimsa, plane of Yama Devas, that's called Yama, plane of contented Devas, Tusita, plane of Devas who delight in creating, they're called Nimmana Rati, and the 6th heaven, sensual heavens. These are all sensual heavens. The plane of Devas enjoying the sense pleasures created by others, Paranimita Vasavasti. So there are 11 sensual world where one can be reborn. The 4 apayas, the human world, and the 6 sensual heavens. And then there are 16 fine material Brahma worlds called Rupa Brahmaloka. And this is where people who have developed jhanas through meditation, concentration meditation, they develop the 1st jhana, 2nd jhana, 3rd jhana, 4th jhana. We'll talk about them in the future. So if one has developed the 1st jhana at the time of the death, they will be reborn in the one of the 3 first immaterial existence, these 3. And then there are 3 Brahma worlds for people who have developed the 2nd jhana. And there are 3 Brahma worlds for people who have developed the 3rd jhana. And the rest of the 7 are for people who have developed the 4th jhana. And out of the 7, the last 5, from 12 to 16, they are called pure abodes, Suddhavasas. We have talked about them before. Let us say there's an anagami, a non-returner, and someone becomes a non-returner, anagami in this life and dies without becoming an arahant. So an anagami, when they expire, they will be reborn in one of these 6 pure abodes called Suddhavasas, and they will become arahants there and attain Nibbana. And finally, there are 4 planes of existence called immaterial existence, Arupa world, where there is no physical body, only the mind exists. So there's a possibility that any of us can be reborn in any of these 31 planes of existence. The 4 apayas, the human world, the 6 sensual worlds, and the 16 material Brahma worlds, and the 4 immaterial Arupa Brahma worlds. So the ultimate goal of a Buddhist practitioner is obviously to end rebirth, and that is through Nibbana, by attaining enlightenment one day. And we know that one attains enlightenment through 4 stages. The first stage, a stream enterer, one becomes a Sotapanna by eradicating 3 of the 10 fetters. And then one becomes a once returner called Sakadagami by weakening the 2 further fetters. And then the 3rd stage is non-returner, Anagami, that I talked about. And the final stage is Arahant, and that is enlightened. And we know that the path to attain enlightenment is the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path, we know, consists of right view, Samma Ditti, right intention, Samma Sankappa, right speech, Samma Vacha, right action, Samma Kammanta, right livelihood, Samma Ajiva, right effort, Samma Vayam, right mindfulness, Samma Sati, and right concentration, Samma Samadhi. Let us look at a few analogies that have been described in the Buddhist literature to explain that when one is reborn, there's nothing solid moves from one life to the next life. And one example is when a candle is lit from another, or a lamp, any lamp is lit from another lamp. There's nothing substantial passes from one candle to the next candle. And it's only the energy that crosses from one lamp to the next lamp. And the second analogy that has been described is when someone learns from something, so let us say a pupil learns something from a teacher, the pupil has received new knowledge, but nothing has moved from the teacher to the pupil in a material sense. And the third analogy that is being described is when one billiard ball strikes another billiard ball, the first one will direct the speed and direction of the second ball. But again, nothing moves from the first ball to the second ball apart from the energy. And the fourth analogy is ourselves. Let us say myself. I was a baby, I was a toddler, I was a teenager, I was a young man, I was a middle age, and I'm in old age now. And every stage influences the next stage. And so when I consider myself, am I the same person who was the baby or toddler? Or am I a different person? And it's neither, it's not the same person. And I'm not a different person either. Next, I like to talk briefly about this Professor Ian Stevenson, who did some research on children who remembered their past lives. And Ian Stevenson was a professor of psychiatry at University of Virginia. And in the 60s, he got interested in these children who started talking about their previous lives. And during his career, he investigated over 3,000 children from all over the world. And in 1966, he published his first paper about the 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation. And at that time, there were a lot of criticisms about his research. He said, there's a cultural bias. These cases are coming from Buddhist and Hindu countries. They already believe in reincarnation and rebirth. And the people who were interpreters were also biased. And so there were a lot of criticisms. But then later, someone looked at his cases. And at that time, there were over 1,300 cases. And when they broke it down, they discovered that actually the most number of cases were in America, 324, and then Burma and India, Turkey, Great Britain. So, and the other interesting thing was that out of these 3,000 children, there were 225 children who were reborn with birthmarks or birth defects that linked to injuries in the previous birth. And he investigated. Now, I am not doing a critical analysis of the pros and cons of Professor Stevenson's research. Why I am talking about this, I want to talk briefly about one of the cases, one of the children from his 3,000 odd children. And that's a boy called Dhammaruwan. He was born in Sri Lanka. He was born on 18th of November in 1968 in a place called Matale, Sri Lanka. If you can remember, the 4th Buddhist Council was held in Matale. And this Dhammaruwan, this little boy at the age of 2 years, he would sit on the floor cross-legged in the posture of meditation, and he would start meditating and chant Pali Sutras, 2-year-old. When he was 3 years old, he was chanting Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha's first sermon. And the monks and others who witnessed his chanting, they decided that really it was not the accent of chanting that was chanted by the Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka. It was quite different from the current accent that's used by Buddhist monks. And then this Dhammaruwan disclosed that in a previous life, he was born in India in a Brahmin family. And as a Brahmin student, he learned Vedas. Then he became a monk under Venerable Buddhaghosa in Nalanda University. And those of you who know, who may have read Buddhaghosa's writings, he is the famous commentator who went from India to Sri Lanka and wrote the famous book, The Path of Purification, Visuddhimagga. And he translated most of the commentaries, Buddhist commentaries, into Pali, Venerable Buddhaghosa, in the 5th century AD. And Dhammaruwan disclosed that he was a pupil of Venerable Buddhaghosa, and he learned Pali chanting from him, and he became a Pali reciter. Now, Pali reciters are called Bhanakas. If you remember, from the first Buddhist council that was held, let's say, 3 months after the Buddha's passing away, until the 4th Buddhist council in Sri Lanka, when the Tripitaka, the Pali canon, was written down on palm leaves, the whole of the Tripitaka was maintained through oral tradition. So monks will memorize the Tripitaka, keep chanting, reciting them, and then teach the next generation. And they are called Bhanakas. And this boy disclosed that he also became a Bhanaka, that's learning Pali, the canon, and repeating it. And he disclosed that when he actually went to Sri Lanka with Venerable Buddhaghosa in the 5th century AD. And Venerable Buddhaghosa stayed in Mahavihara in Anuradhapura. The Mahavihara was the temple that was started after the visit of Arahan Mahinda, who took Buddhism to Sri Lanka. So Dhammaruwan disclosed that he stayed with Venerable Buddhaghosa in Anuradhapura, in this Mahavihara. So at that, I remember hearing about this boy in the early 70s. And at that time, he became so famous that the president and the prime minister took a personal interest in this boy. And the president of Sri Lanka at that time was a gentleman called Jayawardena, J.R. Jayawardena. And the president took this boy to Anuradhapura and to check whether what he was telling was true. And when he was taken to Anuradhapura, Dhammaruwan identified the exact locations where he used to stay. And the president got people to excavate, and they found archaeological evidence of the kutis and places where he said he used to stay. So he was interviewed personally by Professor Ian Stevenson, and also by the present Buddhist scholars like Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhikkhu Analaya. They have both written about this boy. And the recordings of his chanting are available online. Anybody can listen to it. And it's amazing because he's chanting as a little child, Jamma Chakkapawatana Sutta, Mahanidana Sutta. They're very complex and complicated suttas. And then the usual Mahamangalas, Roh, Ratana, and Karaniya Sutta. And then the Bojjhanga Sutta, Girimananda Sutta, and the passages from Abhidhamma. They were all chanted as a little child. And this is Dhammaruwan as a child when he started chanting. And this was when he grew up. And then he became a Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka. He's still there. He's, I think, about 53 years old. Now, if I can manage to play, let us see whether we can listen to a bit of his chanting. Let us see. Probably, yes, it's coming. Sorry, I hope you were able to listen a bit. And finally, I'd like to discuss some evidence that have been presented with regard to rebirth. The firstly, as I spoke before, during the night of the enlightenment, the Buddha gained this speech through mental powers. And through the mental powers, Buddha declared that I saw my own previous rebirths and the rebirths of other beings. And there are numerous examples in the scriptures, in the discourses, where the other monks or other people will come and ask Buddha, so-and-so died, so where was he born, where was she born? And then he would declare that so-and-so is in the heaven, or so-and-so in the apaya, or is reborn somewhere. So there are examples in the suttas. And great arahants like Sariputta, Moggallana, Anuruddha, Mahakashyapa, they had the mental power to see their own past as well. And there are discourses where they recollect their own previous births. And inequality in the society, as I remember, we talked about it last time. Buddha was asked, why is there so much inequality in the society? People rich, poor, short, ugly, beautiful, wise, not wise. And the Buddha said it's due to karma. And for karma to act, there has to be rebirth. And obviously the instance of young children recollecting memories of past lives that I have just discussed. And also there are a lot of instances of child prodigies. I remember, I believe the Mozart, the music genius, started writing music when he was 5 years old. And there was another instance of a 3-year-old golf prodigy in United States. And he is believed to have won 13 golf championships in the previous life in states. So there are a lot of mathematicians, scientists, and musicians. I remember watching a 3-year-old Indian boy playing a tabla in a masterly way. So there are a lot of child prodigies, which will also explain that they would have learned it in a previous life and not in this life. And then this feeling of déjà vu, that when we go to a certain place, we feel as if we have been there before. And similarly, when we meet some people, we feel as if we have seen them before, or that we like them a great deal without having seen them before, or that we don't like somebody as soon as we see. So these are probably explainable through our experiences in a previous birth. And then finally, we see that people who are very pious, moral, working hard, sincere, honest, are not going up in life, they are suffering. Whereas the crooks and robbers and people who do all bad things, they have a luxurious, wonderful life. And again, the explanation could be that probably even if one does good things now, effects of some bad karma in the previous birth may be affecting now But the results of the good things that one does now obviously will come after us. And I think I will stop there and have a discussion. Thank you.